firewall which we were discussing in the previous video. So to continue with that, so next we have the practical issues to discuss. So we have two practical issues to discuss. One is the placement of firewall. So where exactly should I place the firewall? And the second one is the firewall configuration. So how exactly I'm supposed to configure the firewall? So this when it comes to the security architecture of a medium size or a large organization, it includes firewalls, proxy servers, VPN terminators, and intrusion detection, intrusion detection or prevention devices. Okay, so one of the component that is included in the security architecture is firewall. So we'll just look into the placements of firewall. So coming to this firewalls. So first we note that the firewall helps in the segregate or isolate the network into multiple security zones. Okay, so each firewall in the organization, it enforces the rules that control the transfer of packets between the security zones. So at the very least there are 3 zones where we are supposed to apply this firewall. Okay, as I already mentioned, one single firewall cannot achieve the security. So we have to install or place the firewalls in multiple zones. So what are the commonly in general or what we can identify at the basic level is 3 zones. One is the internet, the second one is the region containing the public accessible servers, and the third zone is the internal network. Okay, so the figure which here you can see on this slide here, so it depicts a 4-zone layout using 3 firewalls. So the 2 firewalls here, it has been visible to you, and the third firewall, it is within this router. Okay, so as I mentioned in the previous video, so even the routers will have the basic type of packet filtering firewalls within them. So once after the packets have gone through that router firewall, then it will come into this firewall. So since it is not depicted in the figure here, so this is considered as the first firewall, but this figure here, it contains 3 firewalls. Okay, so the first is really a router with some packet filtering capability. Okay, so next this is the access router that interfaces with the internet. So this router, it actually interfaces with the internet, and it is connected to stateful firewall. So the second type of firewall which we discussed was stateful inspection firewall. So this firewall is a stateful firewall. Okay, firewall 1, so which has 3 interfaces here. You can just see it has got 3 interfaces. So one interface connected to the router, the other interface you can just see it has been connected to DMZ1. So what is this? DMZ1 is demilitarized zone. Okay, so demilitarized zone. So what is this so which zone is called as demilitarized zone is the area between 2 firewalls. Okay, so the zone between the firewall 1 and firewall 2, it is demilitarized zone. So that is the reason why this is DMZ1 and this is DMZ2. So these are the 2 zones that appear between these 2 firewalls, firewall 1 and firewall 2. Okay. So in this type of firewalls, see the firewall with more than 2 interfaces, they are called as multi-ohmed. Okay, and the zone connected to the right interface here for this firewall 1, it is referred as screened subnet. Okay, so though it is more commonly referred to as demilitarized zone, it is now labeled as DMZ1. Okay, and so these demilitarized zones are also so called because they often host servers that are accessible to the internet and also to the internal network. So why we call it as subnet is, or why we call it as demilitarized zone is, they host servers that are accessible to the internet. You can just see all these servers are the host servers that are accessible to the internet and also to the internal network. So because they are accessible to the public, they are the most likely machines to get compromised in the entire network. So that is the the loophole with such subnets, because they might end up getting compromised with the security issues, but that should not actually happen. So for this reason, machines in demilitarized zones often run hardened versions of operating system, and also unnecessary services on these machines should be removed, and newly available patches for these machines should be deployed expeditiously. Okay. In addition, an IDS or IPS should be placed in demilitarized zone to generate alerts in the event of any intrusion. Okay. So once a machine in demilitarized zone, if it is compromised, so other machines in demilitarized zone will definitely get infected. And the next step could well be will be compromise of the internal machines as well. So this is more likely if a compromised machine in a demilitarized zone share a trust relationship with the internal machine. So hence the firewall that separates the demilitarized zone from the internal network is a critical component of security architecture. Okay, so this now coming into this first demilitarized zone, what exactly it contains. So it contains publicly accessible servers, and these include the web server, the external email server, and the DNS server. And all incoming mail from the internet is received by this email server, which checks for the virus signatures and spam mail. The DNS server, it resolves name of publicly accessible servers, and however care should be taken to ensure that it does not contain address records of any internal machines. So why this last statement, that we have to ensure that it does not contain any address records of any of the internal machines is, you know very well, the worm's target is the email, the mailbox, to look into the address of other victims. So that's the reason why we don't keep the address records of any internal machines. Okay, and along with that, what this DMZ2 it contains the internal email server, and this is a server that hosts the mailbox of company employees. Okay, so it handles the sending and receiving of all mail between internal parties, and it periodically establishes a connection to the external mail server to retrieve all incoming mail, and outgoing mail can be handled in several ways. Okay, the internal mail server can set up an SMTP connection to a remote mail server to transfer the mail. So alternatively, it can connect to the external mail server and use it to relay all outgoing mail. So along with that, this DMZ it contains an internet proxy server. So all internal users who wish to access external web pages, they get connect to the proxy. The proxy it authenticates the internal user and decides whether a page can be accessed. That is, different restrictions might be applied to different class of users. And the proxy scans incoming web pages for virus signatures and objectionable content. So finally, the proxy also performs caching of web pages. And now coming to the internal network, it contains this internal network I'm speaking about. So the internal network, it contains application servers, database servers, and user workstations. So it also has internal DNS server again. Okay, and this DNS server is different from this DNS server. In that it provides mapping between the domain name of internal machines and their IP address. So this is meant internally. Okay, this is for the external mapping of the internal machines and their IP address. So there it is the external machines and the IP address. Okay, the internal machines all have the private address, and it is neither necessary nor desirable for third parties on the internet to be aware of the private addresses of internal machines. So hence this DNS server is placed in the internal network as well. Okay, so a feature of security architecture is that the service such as DNS and email are actually, you can see they have split the DNS and email. So that is there is an internal DNS server as well as external. So likewise there is an internal email server and an external one. So generally no external connection should be allowed to internal servers, and connections in reverse direction from internal servers to host on the internet should either be forbidden or severely restricted. So this is all about the placement of firewalls. Okay, so next coming to the configuration of firewall. So you will be deciding what rule set you want to define for different class of users. So this is just a the two table here. You can just see some of the simplified rule set that has been given to the firewall 1. So this is the rule set for firewall 1, and this is the rule set for firewall 2. Okay, so the first rule set, it states that no machine from this one. Okay, the first rule set here. So what it states is no machine from any other security zone is permitted to establish a TCP connection to any internal machine. Whereas when it comes to the rule 2 and 4, it says that other than connections from internal stations to the internal mail server that is on port 25, and web proxy that is on port 80. So this port 80. No other connections are permitted to this DMZ1, DMZ2 or the internet. Okay, so that is what it means. Okay, so first one I'll repeat. So the first one, what it says is no machines from any other security zone is permitted to establish a TCP connection. So a TCP connection to any internal machines. So from outside there is no any. So only the connection has to take place within the internal. Whereas the second and from second, third, second, third and fourth, what they say is other connections from internal stations to the internal mail server and internal stations to the internal web proxy using the port 80, and no other connections are permitted. Apart from these two, no other connections are permitted to DMZ1 and DMZ2. Coming to this simplified rule set of firewall 1, what this first one, rule 1 states that no TCP no TCP connection is to be established to any machine in DMZ2 from any machine in DMZ1 or the internet. Rule 2, it states that external mail server can accept connections from the internal mail server. Okay, so this one, internal mail server and external mail server, what I'm referring to. So it states that rule 2, it states that the external mail server can accept connections from internal mail server to receive incoming mail or to send outgoing mail. And next, rule 3, it allows connections to the external mail server from mail servers on the internet to deposit incoming mails. Rule 4 and 5, they permit connections from internet to organizations web server and external DNS server respectively. I said about both 4 and 5. And rule 6, it states that no other connections may be set up to any machine in DMZ1 for any other purposes apart from what are the purpose which we have mentioned. And the internet proxy in DMZ2 and the external mail server are permitted to make connections to machines on internet to access web pages and to send outgoing mail. So that is what the 7 and 8 see. This 7 and 8 actually they say. Okay, and finally the rule 9, it confirms that no other connection from organization machines to the internet for other purposes allowed. Okay, so these are some of these are the way in which the rules could be defined. I mean, see the security policy could be defined, or the access control list I can just say, or else I can also say it as the rule set. So this is all about the chapter firewall. Thank you guys.